Hello and welcome to the Paddock Pass podcast presented by Fly Racing and Renthal Street. For premium clip-ons, chains, sprockets, check out renthal.com. On today's Paddock Pass podcast, we're going to look back at the Aragon Grand Prix. And I have to say, this was probably one of the most exciting weekends that I've remembered for a long time through the season because it all went down to the last lap. First time we've had a last lap change the lead in pretty much a year. So we got a fair bit to get through on today's Paddock Pass podcast. Steve English, David Emmett, Adam Wheeler, and Neil Morrison on the pod. And let's jump straight in with you, David. You're still actually in Aragon at the minute. You just couldn't leave it. All the excitement of the weekend, you wanted to stick around for as long as possible.
No, I mean, it's such a beautiful place here that we like to hang around. And it's it's still like, sort of 28 degrees here. And at home it's 15 degrees and raining.
Yeah, it's about 28 degrees Fahrenheit here in Dublin again. So, I can understand wanting to stay in Spain. Adam, you're obviously in Barcelona at the minute, back home, but not for too much longer. You got Motocross of Nations this weekend as well. So, jet set and keep going.
Yeah, that's right, Steve. I think it's the 75th Motocross of the Nations, so it's a pretty big deal, big annual event. The oldest team event in the, hang on, let me get this right. The oldest team event short circuit activity racing in the FIM canon, because of course you have the ISD, which has been running for years and years and years. But the Motocross of the Nations is a big deal. So I'm over to Redbud, which is means a flight to Chicago. So while everyone else is going the other way to Motegi, I'm going. I think I have to work Motegi 14 or 15 hours behind the actual race time. So that's going to be an interesting experience.
Are we expecting Andorra to win again, as they always do, or is it not like MotoGP?
No, it will be the USA. If the USA don't win, then I will fall off my chair. And they have to, because they've had a very barren streak, and being the largest nation in the world of dirt bike riders and the largest motorcycle market for dirt bikes, and really they should. So it should be like that. But it means I won't be on the Paddock Pass podcast note show. So people who are fed up of hearing my voice on Patreon will rejoice, because I will not be offering any input, obviously, from Japan.
Yeah, there's a good chance then that we'll actually get the show named correctly, the Paddock Notes podcast, Paddock Notes show, over the course.
Yeah, we're talking about the Gran Premio Animoca, the Aragon, Steve. Okay, not the Aragon Grand Prix.
That's very true. That's very true. I have to say, you mentioned the Nations and 6 days of enduro, and it is that busy stretch of the year where everything seems to come to a head in all of those championships. But Neil, we've still got another 5 rounds of MotoGP left. Obviously, you're in Barcelona at the minute. Superbikes actually go to Catalonia this weekend as well, so I'll actually get the chance to go for a cup of coffee with you on Wednesday, and then it's the Japanese Grand Prix. So it's busy stretch now, obviously, with all the flyways.
Yes, exactly. I'll be battening down the hatches because Steve English will be in town. I'll be unplugging my phone and turning everything off.
Airplane mode constantly, just for fear that I get in contact with you. That's fair enough.
Luckily, you don't have a daughter to lock up now.
Exactly. Yes, that's very true. But yes, I'm actually skipping Motegi. I usually don't go there. It's a bit on the expensive side, and it's obviously expensive to do the entire flyaway run of races. So I can't say that I am that sad looking at the stress that some of my colleagues went through getting their visas or having to get their visas. There were a few nervous people. That seemed like a pretty arduous process. So my kind of crazy long 2 days of traveling can wait until next week when I'm going to Thailand.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, that's also a bit of an arduous one as well. But let's kick straight into the Aragon Grand Prix weekend. And Adam, I'm going to come straight to you for your moment of the weekend.
For me, Steve, it was first race of the day. It's kind of unusual to see a rider in Moto3 be as dominant as controlling as Izan Guevara was. I didn't actually see the post on social media, but I believe he's already confirmed to be stepping up to Moto2 next year. At the moment, it looks like he's going to be going up as world champion, because Dennis Foggier and also his teammate in the Gas Saspa squad, Sergio Garcia, had a pretty miserable day in Aragon. But Guevara just controlled things from start to finish. I thought it was probably the best ride of the day. And yeah, fantastic. And for a rider that's has a very kind of cheruby looking face, seems very like butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. has finished off the podium only twice in the last 10 events, and now firmly in control. So I thought it was a fantastic ride.
And his race was 24 seconds faster than the winning time from last year's Moto3 race at Aragon, which is, a night and day difference. There is something kind of Jorge Lorenzo-esque, I would say, about how Ethan Guevara controls races from the front. And I mean, that's just an enormous jump from one year to the next. So it shows you what a kind of incredible job he's doing when he does get to the front and sets his own pace.
Yeah, I have to say, Guevara and Aragon's always special. Like, obviously, for me, I've worked a lot in CEV as it was in Junior GP now. For some of what we saw from him there a few years ago, I think he won from 20th on the grid, and he did double. So he's always been very special at Aragon, but he's a special rider as well. I remember last year, whenever he stepped up, I actually had my money on him to beat Acosta for the championship last year, and mostly that was just down to the fact that he had much better odds. But he's a special rider that everyone from the Junior GP paddock knew how good he was going to be. And this year, he's actually been able to show it. Last year, I think, and especially Neil will be able to remember it better than I will, but there was a lot of races last year where it was just a bit messy. And that seems to have gone this year. He's had, 4 wins, 9 podiums. So he's pretty much been a regular in the top 3 all the way through the season. 33-point lead. And unfortunately for Adam, your championship hope for the season, Sergio Garcia, it's just going a little bit haywire for 13th this weekend. And that's a big chunk of points to give up.
Yeah, there's a bit of a meltdown, Steve. And also, don't forget Guevara, I think, is heading for the quadruple. I mean, that's 3 Grand Prix wins now in Spanish soil. So he's got one more to go in Valencia, and that'll be quite a nice little box set.
He's a special rider if the odds are right, Steve.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to pick my moment of the weekend next, Neil, and it's another special rider because it's Pedro Acosta winning in Moto2. And I thought for me, this was a really impressive performance. I thought the Moto2 race was just really good because when Fernandez gets away at the start, you kind of think this could be massive for the championship. And Acosta, after only a couple of laps, you knew that he was going to get the hoops in and close him down, and he looked really strong. And it was a really impressive win from Acosta. Fernandez, he still finishes on the podium, but he only picks up 3 points over Ayagura, who does well in the last lap. I thought the Moto2 race was really interesting.
Yeah, it was an interesting race. I felt slightly sorry for Augusto Fernandez because he gets confirmed to join Gas Tech 3. Definitely stepping up to MotoGP, and then Pedro Acosta basically goes and proves why Augusto has only got the 1 year in MotoGP before he gets replaced by Acosta, because it was just an outstanding ride by Acosta. Fernandez is really good, but Acosta is clearly something very special.
I feel a bit extra sorry for Augusto as well, Dave, because one of your numbskull Dutch colleagues managed to usurp the Gas announcement a day earlier by taking some pictures of a kind of a confidential photo shoot on the track. So this is like pit lane. If it's visible from outside, it is not private. It's completely the fault of KTM, who decided that they needed outside pictures when the indoor pictures had already been done. So it's exactly the same as in pit lane. It's when people come up and say, "No, you can't take pictures." I can. If you don't want me to take pictures, shut the garage. There are options for keeping you sick. Or take it away. Go and take it away from. Go and take the pictures away somewhere else. Go up to the bloody Parador and take pictures up there. That would also be great. So no, zero sympathy. I agree with the policy against teams of brands. And if you're going to show stuff, then you need to have it taken. But he could have shown a bit of professional courtesy and respect to a fellow media colleague.
Nah, nonsense.
I have to say,
journalist here, come on.
If you're able to keep things secret from the outside, if it's visible. I should probably close the curtains then as well. But I want to come to you next then as well, Neil, for your moment of the weekend. What was it for you?
My moment of the weekend, Steve, was obviously the first couple of corners were notable for what was going on back in around 6th, 7th place with Marc Marquez, Fabio Quartararo. But my moment was what was going on just up ahead. And I had to go back and rewatch it a few times to understand exactly what had happened, because obviously everyone's attention was taken by Quartararo's crash. Brad Binder's start for me was absolutely sensational. 10th to 2nd, I think, in 5 corners, and how he managed to do that was just a brilliant piece of riding. It was quite opportunist. He took advantage of, I think, Alessio Spargo diving under Enea Bastianini at turn 3 to pass both of those guys, but then to have the confidence and the aggression to then pass Jack Miller a corner later for second was remarkable. And I think it was the start of one of Binder's best rides of the season, probably of his best rides in MotoGP. I mean, I don't think he had really any right to be 4th place at the checkered flag.
Yeah, I think it was another one of those situations where Aragon, a bit like what we've seen a few times in the past from KTM, whenever the grip's down, that bike does work well. Binder's always really good in those low grip conditions as well, and a really impressive ride. It would have been great for him to have capped it off with a podium as it was. 4th, the flag is still as good as we've seen from KTM for a long time. Dave, what about you? What was your moment of the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, Binder's ride was just exceptional, certainly. But my moment of the weekend was the factory Ducati garage after Enea Bastianini won, beating Pecco Bagnaia, because they were doing their very best to look extremely pleased and happy to take 20 points and to have a Ducati win, while also being really obviously a little bit upset that things hadn't quite worked out the way that they'd planned, and also that a fellow Ducati rider had robbed Pecco Bagnaia of 5 points, which could be very important by the time we get to the end of the championship. It's made even more complicated by the fact that Gresini is the sort of least directly affiliated team with Ducati. I mean, obviously there are Ducati people in and out of the garage and all the rest of it, but it's not like Pramac, which is basically the junior team. It's not like VR46, which also has a factory bike in there. They have no hold over Gresini. They have no hold over Enea Bastianini. And even better, it was the fact that Bastianini is going to be Pecco Bagnaia's teammate next year, and it's also setting up an absolutely fantastic dynamic for next year, because Jack Miller's been the perfect teammate. He's been perfectly willing to help Enea, and he's been perfectly willing to help Pecco, to help him win. And Bastianini is having none of that. And Bastianini is going to factory Ducati to beat Pecco Bagnaia, and this was sort of made it really clear.
Yeah, I think it was one of those situations, Dave, because obviously I have to bring everything back to Toprak versus Ray. And it was similar to 2019 when we had when you had Toprak on the Kawasaki, Johnny on the Kawasaki, and Misano was the interesting one for me because it was basically carbon copy of what happened in MotoGP. Into turn 4, Bastianini wasn't able to make the move. He made a small mistake. The exact same thing happened when Toprak was a Kawasaki rider, and he had to bail out of it. And then as the season wore on, he got braver and braver and realized, you know what? I just want to win. I want to win races. I want my win bonuses. I want that number beside my name. And he started to make the moves when he had them. And this was one of those ones as well, because Ducati can be annoyed about whatever they want about the 5 points potentially lost. At the end of the day, Bastianini did a better job. He deserved to win the race. There's still 5 races to go. There was 6 races to go at the weekend, which is, a huge portion of the season, a third of the season, basically. So for Bastianini, I think this was a move he had to make. He clearly weighed it up for lap after lap after lap. He bailed out of moves down the back straight into the last corner. He was setting Pecco up, and then he picked us all by surprise with the move. It was a fantastically judged move, really good race win for him. And, I don't really know why Ducati looked so ash-faced about it. They're still 10 points behind Fabio. It's not the end of the world. It was a good day for them.
Maybe, Steve, it's something to do with a bit of Mick and Repsol Honda-itis, because, it's been 5 Grand Prix now where Ducati have pretty much locked things out in terms of podium finishes. I mean, apart from a couple from Maverick Vinales and, of course, Alessio Spargo at the weekend, a Japanese bike hasn't been on the podium since pre-Assen. When Fabio Quartararo made the first of his I don't want to say mistakes, but the first time his scorecard has taken a dent. So yeah, Ducati getting very much into a celebratory mode, it has to be seen. And as you would expect, and as we said at the end of last year, having that amount of bikes on the grid. So it's all going swimmingly for them. Also, Brad Binder's fourth place, I think, was his second best result of the season. I can't remember. It might be you, Dave, who asked him in the debrief afterwards, or maybe you, Neil, whether that was his best ride of the year. And he sort of correctly pointed out that, his ride in Qatar when he finished on the podium was his standout so far. But that also was, definitely one for the memory books in 2022.
Also, I mean, it was a fantastic ride by both Bastianini and Bagnaia. And what I found really interesting is the fact that we've been talking about how Aragon is really tough on tyres, but there was no drop for the front two. They were 9 seconds faster than last year. But at the start of the race, they were doing 48.3s, like low 48s. And at the end of the race, they were also doing 48.3s, low 48s. And if you look at, for example, Miller and Brad Binder and Alessio Spargaro, they were all had 6 tenths, 7 tenths of a second drop in their pace from the beginning to the end, and there was just no drop at all for the front runners, which it's remarkable progress from the bikes and from getting everything sorted. So yeah, that for me was incredibly impressive.
Well, let's get to one of our big talking points for the weekend, because obviously it flows in nicely from this. And speaking to everyone on Sunday night, one of the big talking points was whether or not we should have team orders at this stage of the season. Neil, what's your opinion on it?
Well, I mean, this kind of follows on from Dave's moment of the weekend, which was the ashen faces, which were done in the Ducati garage. I think if you were writing an article and you wanted a photo for your overjoyed Ducati bosses celebrate third straight constructors title, you have to choose that screenshot of them kind of embracing each other afterwards, all looking really dour and sad. I mean, it was like, come on, lads, you just qualified, locked out the front row, got another 1-2 finish. I think it was the first time in history as well. We had 7 Ducatis in the top 10, 7. So overall, it was a decent day at the office. But clearly I think from that expression, they felt that maybe Bastianini had crossed the line or had done something that he shouldn't have done. Certainly from Davide Tardozzi's expression, you would say it's almost something that he wasn't expecting. Bastianini had broken some kind of code. And it was, we were obviously told back at Misano that Gigi Dall'Igna had gone to all of the riders apart from Pecco and said, go for the win. If the win's there, go for it. But if you're with Pecco on track, don't do anything stupid and don't do anything too risky. And I don't think what Bastianini did was particularly risky. I mean, it was clean. He pressured Pecco, and he pressured him at some points where it could have been risky, like you mentioned, the last corner. Stevie, I think there was 2 times before he actually made the move that he sort of shadowed him down back straight, but that's not a conventional place to pass in MotoGP. What he did at turn 7 was fantastic, precise, clean. But you think back to what Claudio Domenicali said after the Misano race, and he said, maybe it's a bit too risky what Enea did, on track. And it was interesting reading Matt Oxley's blog yesterday with some comments from Carlo Panat, who is Enea's team manager. He said, why did Claudio feel the need to say something like that when he could have just said, we had a 1-2 in Misano, and that's something to be celebrated. So I think perhaps now we could see, well, I don't think so, actually. I don't think we will see team orders from Ducati in the next race or two, because Enea still has a chance at the championship. But you get the impression that the Ducati, he should have done something with consideration for Pecco at that point in the race.
Yeah, no, I mean, don't you think it gets much harder now for someone in Ducati senior management to say to Gresini, right, put the anchors on, this is Pecco's championship. He's only 10 points away after being almost 40 in the championship. I mean, that was nearly 2 Grand Prix distance he had away from, Quartararo only a few races ago. But then also, perhaps Bastianini can think, well, I kind of let you have Misano. I could have attacked you. I could have been more aggressive. We both could have ended up in the gravel, or I could have tried another retaliation move, and I didn't. So now Aragon was mine. So it's a bit of a complicated dynamic, isn't it?
Well, first of all, I mean, we're talking about team orders. This isn't team orders because they're not both in the same team. Enea Bastianini,
well, they will be next year.
Yeah, but it's not this next year yet, is it? It's this year. That's how time works, Ad.
Races are only, you're only as good as your last one and all that crap, Dave. So it's not going to be that. I mean, it's only it's only a couple of weeks, and in Valencia he's going to be wearing a different color.
And also, if Gigi Dall'Igna is speaking, going down to all of the Ducati riders and speaking to them, they are all very, very aware of who is number one and who is the boss.
Yeah, you listen.
Completely agree with that. Just pointing out they are not in the same team. This is not team orders. This is factory orders. That's something else.
Semantics.
Yeah, with the semantics, it matters. It matters. It's very important. The meaning of words matters. But I mean, for a start, I mean, my feeling, I hate team orders. I think that I don't think there should be any. I think they're extremely difficult. I think motorcycle racing it's a team sport, yes, but the team consists of the rider and the people who help him, the mechanics, the crew chiefs, the data engineers, all the rest of it. As soon as the light goes out, that's it. It's all down to the rider. So I don't think team orders have any place in MotoGP. I also think that motorcycle racers, because it is such an individual sport, I don't think they're particularly inclined to listen to team orders. I mean, we all remember Jorge Lorenzo at Valencia with Andrea Dovizioso and the number of times that he got shown mapping 8, and I think that they then started showing him the pit board, and there were people on the side of the pit wall waving and gesticulating and just genuinely being. Eventually, I think Lorenzo just got bored and realised that it wasn't much he could do, so he could let Dovizioso through. And Enea Bastianini does not strike me as the quiet, submissive type who will do exactly as you please, as he's told either. So I don't think it's going to help. I think that Dall'Igna, I think if Bastianini was completely out of it by the end of the season, then and it comes down to Valencia, there's a chance that he might be willing to help. But right now there's still a long way to go. He's just not going to. He's not even going to bother listening. He'll nod politely and say, "Yes, of course, I'll help Pecco," and then he'll stuff it up the inside. Cleanly, as Neil said, because it was a fantastic pass. It was very clean indeed. But if he gets a chance for a win, he's going to take it.
All of your points are more valid, Dave, if he wasn't going to be a Ducati course rider in a matter of weeks.
But the other thing is, it's really important because when he is a Ducati course rider, he's going to be world champion. And not Pecco Bagnaia. Like, he's not going to join Ducati Corsa to be, a nice number 2. That's also not why he was hired, because if they wanted a nice, quiet number 2 rider, they would have kept Jack Miller, because he's been a perfect teammate. And Enea Bastianini is not going there.
Yeah.
And also, one more thing about this, because the reaction of the Ducati team bosses in the garage also showed you exactly what they thought of the Manufacturers' Championship. All very nice, all very fun, but it's really completely unimportant. The only thing that matters is the Riders' Championship.
Well, it goes back to your reference on time, because Bastianini might be world champion next year, but this is the prime time for Bagnaia to get it this year. So that's not Bastianini's problem. It's just not Bastianini's problem. That is Pecco Bagnaia's problem. I just think if you're a motorcycle brand investing northward of 50 million euros each year into MotoGP, then there are times when racers have to recognize their places as salesmen and employees. And Bastianini, he might seem like this ruthless kind of chap that would, take away a front wheel and, all in the name of victory. But I think he also has the bigger picture in mind. One that he's going to have to. Yes, I think context is everything, Dave. But as we know, and as you rightly pointed out, on a racetrack, a different set of emotions come into it.
I think the last thing a MotoGP rider considers himself is a factory employee. It's a racer first and foremost. And
I beg to differ, Neil. No, I beg to differ, because I think 100% of them care about their contracts and the bonuses and whatever else is coming in. So it's I think
the bonuses is what he was thinking about there, Adam.
Yeah, but you look at somebody like, take an example of Bab Binder, a rider who hasn't had the most competitive motorcycle, but is an expert in building a team and a real sense of camaraderie around him. Just go down to the garage and you'll see it. Or look at Rebel KTM's post on Instagram. and see
His
that
side
kind
of
of
the
reaction
garage.
when he comes into the grid. Yes,
His
and then
side of the
take
garage. He doesn't.
Yeah.
He doesn't give a crap about Miguel Oliveira's side of the garage. He cares about his. And honestly, you're completely right.
It's
Binder's
KTM,
fantastic.
Dave.
No.
It's all
It's
KTM.
Brad. It's not all KTM. It's Brad Binder's side of the garage and Miguel
Right.
Oliveira's side of the garage.
Take Aprilia then. You know, Maverick Vinales has been saying for a number of weeks that his job is there to help Aleix.
Yeah, because he's not fast enough yet. Just wait until next year when he is.
No, we actually managed to prize a few comments out of him over the last weekend where he was looking fantastic, particularly on Friday in Aragon, that he was ready to go for the win if they were 1-2. But, you know, he's still committed. He knows his role and his obligation towards Aprilia. So.
Such innocence.
Different circumstances, yes. I feel that you don't quite, quite recognise in the burning desire that is inside some of these top MotoGP riders.
Yeah, but that's such a cliche, Neil. Yeah, you know, oh blimey, it's yes, a racer will like slay their own mother for a result. I mean,
but they would.
It's 2000.
That's very much the point.
They
absolutely would sell they would definitely sell their grandmother into slavery if they thought it would give them a chance. It would give them a chance of a win.
I'll concede that 9 times out of 10. But I think when you're riding for a factory like Bastianini needs to win next year, you will be incredibly stupid to deny. You know, the Ducati a first Riders' Championship in 15 years.
I admire your loyalty.
I think though this is where it comes down to. This isn't a Bastianini thing. This isn't a Pecco thing. This is a fact that for 5 years Ducati's had, well, over the last 3 years anyway, the best bike on the grid, and they still haven't been able to win a championship. The problem isn't riders. The problem is Gigi hasn't done his job. If his job is to win the championship, and like Dave said, we saw how little they think about the Constructors' Championship now. That's taken for granted they're going to win it. They've got half the bikes on the grid. So, you know, they've got a bit of an advantage to try and do that. But Pecco and Bastianini, Miller, whoever you want to look at, their job isn't to make sure that they stay out of each other's way. It's that they win the championship because Ducati haven't been able to manage things. Gigi's done a bad job. He's a great engineer, but he clearly hasn't done the job that he's supposed to do, which is win the championships. Now you have a situation where Bastianini's in there, still very much in contention on the basis of one more bad weekend for Quartararo or Pecco, and suddenly he's within a race of winning the championship. Bastianini didn't make a dangerous move. If he had clattered into the side of Pecco Bagnaia, then it's a very different argument. Yeah. But he didn't. He put Pecco in a position where if Pecco had a crash, it was all Pecco's fault. Trying to chase him down in the last lap, trying to do this, that, and the other. I thought Bastianini did what he had to do. He didn't do a dirty move. He didn't do anything that was untoward. He just put himself in a position to win that race. So I think that for Ducati, yeah, fair enough. Ducati had gone down and said, right, if you're sitting behind Pecco, don't overtake him. But it's a bit early in the season for that as well. I think we've still got 5 races to go. There's a lot of running still to happen this season. And Bastianini hasn't really made too many big racecraft errors over the last couple of years either. So you almost have to trust him. They've hired him for a reason as well. So they do trust him. But this is one of those situations where if it comes back to bike Ducati, that's not Bastianini's fault, that's Ducati's fault.
Just looking at Bastianini, 48 points back now. He was playing down his chances of the championship. Just looking at the next couple of races coming up, the next 4 races, he's obviously not ridden on a MotoGP machine. And the last time he was there, the only time he was there in Thailand, Japan, Australia, and Malaysia on a Moto2 bike, his results were 11th, 7th, 17th, and 24th. So, I mean, it's a huge ask. However, I guess back in 2019, he was recovering from an ankle injury that he sustained in Austria. And that season, he also finished 24th at Aragon. So, you know, that wasn't necessarily a good form guide for what he's done this year on a MotoGP machine. So, I don't know. I'm inclined to believe that he can be fighting up there in the likes of Thailand, Japan in the next 2 weeks. And if he can be on the podium there and make up ground on Bagnaia and Quartararo for the next 2 races, I am inclined to believe that he is still a player in this title fight.
But also, I think Bagnaia is going to need all the help he can get, because Quartararo is probably going to win in Phillip Island. He'll probably win in Sepang. This is going to go right down to Valencia. So I think now, I think you have to give Bastianini, Aragon on the strength that, he was close but didn't make a move in Misano, like I said. But now I think, much to Dave's disgust, there has to be some sort of overall strategy from Ducati. And I don't think you can blame Delinga so much, Steve, in terms of not bringing Ducati the championship yet. I mean, it's the whole football manager syndrome, isn't it? You can put the team on the field, but you can't score the goals for them.
Yeah, but the manager gets sacked
with a sizable payoff.
Well, don't get me wrong, Gigi will certainly get a sizable payoff if he's sacked. But it is one of those situations where the manager's job is to set tactics, sign the players, line everyone up, get them in a position to do the job. Over a 38-game season in a league, the table doesn't lie. Over 4 or 5 years, the table certainly doesn't lie. You look at Ducati over the last 5 years, there's got to be big questions to be asked. Like, fair enough, there's a couple of those seasons we're up against Marc Marquez. You're not beating Marc because Marc's the best we've ever seen. But we've also had a few years where it hasn't been Marc there. Ducati's had a bike advantage and haven't been able to make it count. And that eventually has to fall on someone's shoulders. And Gigi's the high-profile man. He's the guy that gets all the credit for making the bike great. So it's his job.
With that, and with 5 races to go, I think if there's a Ducati duel again for a win or maximum points, then you'll see some sort of strategy come into play. It has to happen, I think.
Necessary faster. That's the only thing I'm going to say. I mean, yes, there is a responsibility that lies with Pecco Bagnaia to win.
Necessary faster, necessary ad break. So when we come back, we'll continue to talk about the Aragon Grand Prix and some of the other non-Ducati topics. Welcome back to the Paddock Pass podcast presented by Renthal Street and Fly Racing. So we've looked at Ducati. We've had a chat about some of our big moments of the weekend. But Adam, what's your big talking point from the weekend? What's the one thing that you want to get your teeth into? Well, obviously, actually, you got your teeth into team orders there as well. But a second thing.
Well, it's another kind of discussion point, really, Steve. I don't think any of us can have any different opinions on what we saw in the Moto3 class. Also, probably, arguably, one of MotoGP's most watched social media clips when Adrian Fernandez was somewhat abruptly halted by members of the Sterilgarda Max Husqvarna team when he was getting ready to go out, I think, in Q2. So it was bizarre scenes, utterly bizarre. I mean, we've seen 2 different angles as well. When one team's mechanics are stopping another team's rider from exiting the pit lane, as with anything you see on social media, there's always some kind of context missing. For example, Adrian Fernandez used to ride for the Husqvarna team last year. So you imagine there's probably no long-lasting favourable relationship there, clearly by the actions of his former mechanics. As well, I think, Fernandez had been either tagging along with either Yuma Sasaki or John McPhee in previous sessions. But I think it staggered a lot of people, and the subsequent punishments handed out to the Husqvarna mechanics, missing 2 races and having a fine. It certainly was a punishment that fit the crime there. But it does show there's all sorts of little skullduggery that goes on, behind the scenes in MotoGP. It's all not quite so ordered and shiny and lovely as you'd think.
Well, I have to say, skullduggery is putting it a bit lightly because this was ridiculous. It was so blatant as well. And like you said, Adam, none of us are going to have any dissenting views on it. This was a ridiculous situation and rightly was punished a 2-race ban for the mechanics. Obviously, that gets pushed back a couple of weeks as well because they have to make sure that everyone's able to get to Japan and the bikes are able to operate safely. But yeah, this was a very well-deserved penalty for the 2 mechanics.
And it was interesting that it sounds like one of the technicians, I don't think it was one of the 2 mechanics that we saw in the video blocking Adrian Fernandez, but apparently there was another one from Max Racing who was given it a bit of lip when some of the Tech 3 mechanics came out to basically tell him to do one. I think some retribution was visited upon him on Saturday night by one of the Fernandez clan, which adds further spice to the story and shows you that you cross the Fernandez clan at your peril.
Yeah, I mean, this was clearly something which happened. I mean, it had nothing to do with what was going on track. This is an old vendetta that's been going on for a while because, as we were saying, you know, Adrian was riding for the Sterilgarda team last year. The Fernandez family are not particularly loved in the paddock. The father, like many rider fathers, is a bit of a nightmare. And you know, Raul himself, Raul Fernandez is incredibly talented, and it's a good job he is, because he's not particularly loved by anyone in any team he's ridden for either, because he's just an unpleasant young man. He doesn't, he doesn't smile, he doesn't help, he doesn't cooperate, he doesn't work with anyone, he doesn't do, he's not, everything he does, he seems to do grudgingly. He doesn't thank his mechanics. He's the opposite of Brad Binder, as you were saying, Ed. Like Brad Binder comes in, works with his team, helps his team. Fabio Quartararo as well. It's Fabio Quartararo who starts his bike up. He's always in the garage. Pedro Acosta as well, you know, like I was walking past the garage and he's there sort of chatting with his mechanics, being, you know, that they understand how to build a team. And this was, the Fernandez brothers seem to be the opposite. They understand how to destroy a team. And this, I think, was just the old anger and disputes sort of, you know, boiling over onto the track, and it should never have come that far. And it was absolutely disgraceful that these mechanics did what they did at that point. There were much better ways. I mean, there would have been, you know, much better trying to run him over in the car park afterwards or something. But this was unacceptable.
Paddock Pass podcast doesn't
endorse
violence such
I'm not saying they should. I'm saying that they could have, and it would have got away with it.
Yeah, we don't condone any violence, any kind of runnings over in the car park at all, do we? Yes, none of those shenanigans. But I'm a little puzzled by what to make of Adrian Fernandez, because he's undoubtedly there. He has that Tech 3 saddle thanks to his brother. You know, he hasn't particularly torn Moto3 apart, but then in Aragon, I think he took his best result of the season. So there's clearly some sort of motorcycle racer or some sort of ability inside there. But goodness, he even looks completely like his older brother. So it's just a bit, how do we go about separating them? And it's a strange situation. I'm not even sure if Fernandez is going to be part of Tech 3, Red Bull KTM Tech 3 next year. So yes. He's not confirmed. Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yes. And I spoke to some people in the Max Racing team on Saturday night, and they were telling me that it's not just like he's disliked there, he is really disliked. In fact, the word even stronger than disliked was used to describe how he is regarded. So I don't think he won many friends or made many friends there last year. And KTM haven't hired him for next year in the Moto3 team either. So looks like he didn't make many friends in Tech 3 either.
Well, he's lost his meal ticket because Raul has moved on to Aprilia, and Aprilia aren't racing in Moto3.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those situations that you mentioned about, you know, the form that he's had, and even whenever he was coming up through the ranks in Junior GP, he was a very inconsistent rider. He'd have some weekends where he was very good, but a lot of the time he was quite sloppy, and he had a lot of penalties that pushed him on grid penalties or whatever that left him where you could see a lot of talent, but he didn't get the end results that I think he probably warranted at different times in Junior GP. And that's kind of carried through into Moto3 as well as it is right now. And you wait and see what happens from him. He's clearly got a bit of talent, but it's not only just about talent at that level. And that's something we see time and time again. But like you said at the very start of that topic, there's not really going to be too much discussion about the penalty or the incident, because I think everyone in the paddock was just disgusted by it. But Dave, what about you? What was your big talking point from the Aragon Grand Prix?
Speaking of riders who are very good at building a team around them, I mean, Marc Marquez came back, long awaited. Everyone was really wanted to see what he could do, and we saw that he immediately had pace during practice and during qualifying. It was obvious that he was very capable of being fast. The only thing we weren't sure about is what he could do in a race, how long he could last. And he'd been saving himself. He hadn't been doing, especially on Saturday, he hadn't been doing very many laps in a row because he wanted to make sure that he sort of had enough strength in his arm. And it didn't last very long, because what happened was Marc Marquez had a really good start, got up to sixth, had a moment coming out of turn 3. The rear sort of went as basically Bastianini was sort of right on the back of Jack Miller, had to back off a little bit, and then Aleix Espargaro bumped him a bit wide, and so Marquez had to change his line, open the throttle a little bit. The rear sort of span up a little bit, and Fabio Quartararo, who'd been right behind him, slammed into the back of him, crashed, had a really sort of quite a nasty crash. A bit of Fabio Quartararo's fairing got stuck in the back of Marquez's bike, and then when they came out of turn 7, when he applied his ride-out device, and the back of the bike dropped, it locked that up, and it forced him into Taka Nakagami, who was trying to overtake him at that point, and Nakagami went down, and it was just a really, really messy. It was a messy start. Marcus got a lot of flack after the incident from certainly from fans on social media. But when you look at what Marc did, or the incident with Nakagami, it really looks like Marquez had leaned into Nakagami. And it wasn't until sort of afterwards, and when you looked closely and looked at the images in slow motion, you could see that there's something sticking out of the back of his bike that was forcing him to do that. So I don't think it was deserved. It was just a racing incident. I think pretty much. Even Lynn Jarvis was interviewed in the box by Simon Crafar, asked about the incident with Marquez. And Marquez, Jarvis said, "Yeah, we've looked at it a lot, and it does look like a racing incident." It was sort of like reluctantly admitting that yes, it was a racing incident. So yeah, it was just one of those things, and it's also one of those things where Quartararo had a plan, and he was trying to execute. He was trying to get round the outside of Marquez, trying to carry speed through 3 to get a strong exit out of 3 towards 4. And because Marquez lost the rear a little bit, Quartararo was just basically, for a start, he was unsighted because he's hanging off the other side of the bike, loses the rear, and it just slams into the back of it. There's nothing he could do about it.
Yeah, I mean, full sympathy for Marc, because I mean, this also was one of the major highlights of the Grand Prix, wasn't it? I mean, it was an explosive sort of first minute of the racing of the 23 laps there. And the reason we didn't really talk about it at the top of the show is because we wanted to talk about it in the middle of the show. It just seems that, Marc has an impact anywhere, doesn't he? I've been writing a column for ontrackofroad.com this morning, and a rider like Johan Zarco summed it up quite nicely at the beginning of the weekend in his media debrief. He was saying how good it was to have Marc back, how he's such an influential rider, and he's one of the most prominent racers in the MotoGP grid. But by the end of the weekend, and Zarco was one of the riders who was not exactly sticking the knife in, but he was kind of hovering it over, Marcus's throat by sort of saying, that Marc tends to make these things happen. He had admittedly not done more than 5-lap fast-paced runs throughout the weekend. Marquez was probably unlikely to figure in the running at the front for the full race duration. You wouldn't begrudge him going aggressive in the first couple of laps, and also wanting to perhaps lead or see how he could stretch his own pace. I mean, he's fully entitled to do whatever he wants to do with his own race. Of course, let's not forget that Marquez really hasn't been in a race scenario at full fitness for quite some time. Well over maybe 2 years. So it's there's also that factor to consider. But so it was interesting just how people looked at it and kind of ended up shaking their heads thinking, well, this is Marquez. But I think it was, as Dave said, just a very unhappy collision of incidents, and it happened to involve the Repsol Honda 93.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of highlights just how incredibly dangerous the starts, those first few corners are, because everyone is trying to make up ground, especially now where it is becoming increasingly difficult to pass. You have to make up ground at the start. So you're riding very, very close. You've got a lot of bikes very close together. Fabio Quartararo on Saturday said very clearly what his strategy was, starting from sixth. He had to get a good start and he had to make up as many places as possible at the start of the race, so he didn't lose too many places. So he was going to take a lot more risk anyway. And he got an average start. It wasn't a bad start, but it wasn't a great start. He was still in sixth by the time they came out of turn two. In part because Brad Binder got such a fantastic start, and also because Marc Marquez got a fantastic start. I didn't see Marc do anything wrong. I mean, if you really wanted to blame someone, apart from the fact the tire was cold, but if you really had to pick out someone to blame, then maybe the Honda electronics, which we know are quite edgy, and so they tend to sort of it tends to be a bit sort of a bite or not, and the rear span up, it bit, and that was it. And Fabio was just too close to avoid it.
Yeah, I think for me, David, just when you mentioned about the dangers of lap one, I remember talking to Josh Brooks about this whenever he was doing the TT, and I said to him, just about the dangers of road racing, and he said never underestimate how dangerous it is on the first lap of a race into first corners. And Aragon has a lot of pinch points all the way around. Fabio got unlucky. I thought that Lynn Jarvis's reaction was quite telling whenever he just said, "You know what? You qualify midfield. This is what happens." The problem isn't the single incident. It's the fact that you didn't get the job done in qualifying. We saw that with Fabio had a big moment through turn two at the end of Q2. And that was basically what put him into the mid-pack. And he had no chance really of a good result from there. And obviously, you don't think it's going to end as badly as it did for him. But this also showed just how quickly the championship can turn. And that goes back to what we were talking about with Bastianini and Ducati team orders. All it takes is one instant, and suddenly a rider has an injury, they're missing around. Suddenly 48 points for Bastianini can be 23 points overnight. It can be even closer after a couple of rounds in the flyways. And that's where you can't take anything for granted in racing.
It's a really good point that things do change. Five races is still a lot. I mean, I was looking at Luca Marini in 12th. He's 120 points behind Fabio Quartararo, so he is not mathematically ruled out of the championship, as are the other 11 riders ahead of him. Now, I mean, it's almost impossible, but not mathematically impossible. But yeah, that first corner, as you say, that first part of the Aragon track is really tricky, and it's caught a lot of riders out. It's where, for example, Jorge Lorenzo's run at Ducati sort of really ran out when he got bumped off the track there going into turn one. Injured his ankle, if I remember correctly, and he'd been winning races, and then all of a sudden it all sort of went a bit wrong after that. So yeah, it's a really difficult part of the track, and it's a really dangerous moment.
Don't forget also, Dave, turn two was where Maverick Vinales crashed. That turned his weekend around. It was also his first crash of the season, unbelievably, on the Aprilia during free practice. And then I think it was Jack Miller who was telling us that the way the pack funnels into turn one, turn two, it's incredibly tight. And in fact, he seemed to kind of insinuate that it's strange that there's not more accidents or incidents there. I mean, there's plenty of racetracks on the MotoGP calendar where we do have a very tight first turn. I mean, somewhere like Jerez is always tricky. Cotta is, notorious, a charge up into almost a hairpin switchback left-hander. So it's not like the rider's unaccustomed to tackling tight first corners, but Aragon is always a little bit tricky. It's very bus stoppy.
Yeah, I remember actually, turn two is an interesting one as well, because I remember a few years ago, I saw one MotoGP rider grab a younger rider at the end of a qualifying session and just say, never do what you did at the end of qualifying. And the young rider was there thinking, wait, what did I do? What did I do? And the MotoGP rider said, you finished your lap and you cruised around the outside of turn two. Never do that there. When you're slowing down, slow down from the exit of two onward, because you're always liable for someone to come down the inside of you and lose the front through turn two. and that'll be your weekend done. And it's no fault of your own, except you did the wrong thing. You were foolish to roll off too early. You have to get up the hill and then start to slow down. I think that's one of the things with Aragon, where there's a lot of places there. And I remember talking to Chaz Davis, absolute Aragon specialist in superbikes, and he just talked so much about how turn 1 dictates everything all the way up to turn 6. And Aragon's all about piecing all those corners together, and that's the big challenge of it.
Yeah, and especially like turn 2 and turn 3 are right-handers. So the first right-handers are for a long time. The last right-hander is turn 14, which is probably getting on for 2 kilometers away. So, it's almost half the track distance, well over a third of the track distance. That's a lot of time for the right side of the tire to cool off. And at the start of the race, also, the right side of the tire is not completely up to it's not completely operating temperature, despite the fact that it's much softer on that side. So yeah, it's really that part of the track is really, really difficult.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's get on through to the end of our Aragon recap. We're still going to have a little break and then come back to talk about Motegi as well. But let's move on to our winners and losers from the weekend. So alphabetical order. Adam, who's your big winner from the weekend?
Aleix Espargaro, Steve.
That's also an alphabetical order then, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. 2 crashes, carrying slight injuries, as we've seen. He's had a couple of offs, broken finger. He's also had to deal with a fractured heel. He came to Aragon, pretty much like you said with Chaz, something of a Motorland specialist, has a great feeling there, was expecting to win. Even though he downplays the pressure quite well. I mean, Aleix always talks a brilliant game in MotoGP by saying that, it was only a while ago that they were celebrating 6 like a victory. So yeah, I think Aleix Espargaro had a great race. Managed to pit Brad Binder when he needed to. Binder just making a couple of small mistakes, just 2 laps before the end, and Espargaro managed to take advantage. And that was his first podium finish, I think, in 6. So it keeps him just in the title hunt.
Yeah, really important. 17 points back. So it sets up nicely for the flyaways. David, what about you? Who was your big winner from the Aragon Grand Prix?
I think my big winner from the Aragon Grand Prix is Enea Bastianini, because he won the race. He beat his teammate next year, showed him what's what, and pointed out, who's going to be in charge in 2023. And he just rode a fantastic race. He rode an absolutely near perfect race.
You're such an anarchist, Dave.
I am actually, yes.
What about you, Neil? Who was your big winner?
I think you'd be hard pressed to look past Brad Binder for his performance in 6th. Aleix Espargaro after the race was saying how he really felt Brad was one of the top 3 riders currently racing in MotoGP at the moment. He was pretty much faultless right the way from, I think, lap 1 to 21. Didn't really make a mistake or give Aleix or Jack an opportunity to get by him at all. He actually said towards the end he switched engine maps to try and give him a little bit more, but that almost unsettled the bike a bit and made it a bit twitchy. Espargaro was able to get the drive out of the final turn to pass him into the first turn on the penultimate lap. And Binder said he then switched back to the map he was previously on, and that allowed him to be a bit smoother, a bit faster again. So that small little thing just prevented him from getting the podium, but I think overall it was a fine performance. And I mean, yet again, I think we've said this countlessly through the year, but yet again, Brad is kind of almost getting KTM out of jail, if you like, because without him, they would be the results would be so bad, really, so underwhelming. And I think Brad is kind of keeping that ship afloat.
You can actually see on the data or in the lap times when he switches. The last couple of that, I think like 21 and 22, he's doing. He loses basically 0.3 of a second in his lap time. Then he switches back again, and he's really, really fast. So it's quite interesting that you can actually see that.
Yeah, and he lost the podium by only 0.2. So that was it there, Dave.
Yeah, I think they're all fair enough. I think for me, my big winner was Izan Guevara, and we talked about at the top of the show with Adam's moment of the weekend, but I think holding a 33-point lead going into the flyaways, I think this was a really good weekend for Izan, and like Adam said, a really, really strong performance all the way through, a lot faster than last year. So I'm excited to see how the flyaways go for Izan. Neil, let's come to you first then for your loser of the weekend. Who was your big loser?
It was, I think I'm going to say Jorge Martin, Steve. Like, I mean, he did have a decent race, and there was a four-rider fight that he was at the head off at the end of the race in sixth, with Zarco, Rins, and Marini were also in there. So he did all right to finish at the front of that. But I just think there's no point really recently where we've looked at Martin and thought, yeah, Ducati have made the wrong move. You know, Bastianini is comfortably outperforming him at the moment, and yeah, he just doesn't really look like anywhere near the kind of the golden boy that we saw last year that people were sort of predicting to go on and maybe fight for MotoGP titles. He was 12 seconds off the victor, and some of his comments over the weekend just indicate that there's a real I wouldn't say anger, but definitely a bitterness that he was passed over for the factory seat next year. He was talking about, you know, how they've managed that inter-team fight and how he didn't think that was a good idea. He also was asked about what direction he was putting, or he was advising Ducati to take next year, and he said something along the lines of, you know, yeah, we get to test a lot of new things in Pramac, but they don't really listen to us, so you know, we're just here to test, essentially, which doesn't necessarily speak of a rider entirely content with the surroundings. And then he was only kind of too happy to talk up the kind of chaos that was going on behind the scenes when Francesco Guidotti, the team manager, left for KTM at the end of last year. And Pramac didn't really successfully replace him. It looks like Gino Borsoi will move from Aspar over to Pramac Racing next year, and yeah, Martin was saying that was pretty necessary. So yeah, I think just it's quite clear that he's still a bit upset. That's still affecting him, and yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see him looking to move away from Ducati sometime next year.
Yeah,
2024.
Yeah, Jorge Martin is a bit of, again, a strange character, like I was talking about with somebody like Adrian Fernandez. You don't really know what to make of him. He can be quite sort of sulky, sullen, you know, kind of arrogant. If you see the presentation of this guy on something like MotoGP Unlimited, then, you know, he seems quite humble, quite down to earth, but it's not often the character that comes across, especially in his dealings with us. So he could very easily fall into a bit of an Iannone villain type role, I think, just in terms of attitude. I mean, I know he signed a deal with KTM and he was very prepared to go through their whole talent sort of filter, but then quickly after, you know, just 1 year in Moto2, he didn't want to stick around in that particular team anymore. And like Neil says, is how long is his patience going to last with Ducati? And I just think, again, you have to be careful. If you have a reputation of a real lack of patience, a real lack of awareness of needing to get all the ingredients around you to guarantee success, then, you know, you're not going to last long in MotoGP.
Yeah, and I think just listening to what Neil was talking about there as well, it also kind of ties in a little bit with what I was saying earlier about Ducati and Gigi. If you've got a rider like that, they're just using them just as test mules. They're just saying, just get the data. They're not actually giving them the control over developing things, because for Ducati and for Gigi, it seems that the bike will always be the winner rather than the actual rider. And I think that's probably one of those situations that Jorge Martin's going to find himself going forward. But David, what about you? Who was your big loser of the weekend?
My big loser of the weekend is Maverick Vinales. I mean, you know, in part there was not a lot he could have had. He could do about it. He got stuck behind. But going into the weekend, he was telling us how he was going to win the race. Now he felt really, really confident, really strong, and he did show sort of, you know, decent pace from time to time. But he had a crash, his first of the weekend, or the first of the season. Sorry, qualified poorly. He got caught up behind the two incidents on the first lap. Ended up finishing 12th, I think, 13th. You know, made his way forward a little bit, but still, it was just it was not the weekend that he hoped for. He was still quite after the race. He was still quite positive. He was very, you know, quite chipper and quite cheerful. That at least is a good thing. But it was just not the weekend that he was hoping for.
And what about you, Adam? Who was your loser?
Quite obviously, Steve, Taka Nakagami. This is a track where he took pole position a couple of years ago. It's always been one of his favoured circuits. And then, his collision with Marc left him with another visit to surgery in Barcelona with Dr. Mia. We originally heard that he was going to have a bit of a skin graft on several of his fingers. It's now turned out to be just, I think, a tidy up around the tendons on the fourth and fifth finger. So he's going to be fit for his home Grand Prix. And it was a weekend where it was kind of bittersweet for Taka because he had confirmed, obviously, another year in MotoGP, on the Honda, but then, didn't get to finish a lap of the race. So, better luck next time, Taka.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think for me, but my big loser, either Quartararo or Yamaha or both, because Fabio obviously misses out in a lot of points, brings everything down a lot closer to the championship, only 10 points between himself and Pecco. For Yamaha, again, we got to see that for Franco Morbidelli, out-qualified, out-raced by Cal Crutchlow jumping onto the bike. Binder as well, struggling at the weekend. So this just showed again just how dependent Yamaha are on Fabio, and a weekend like this just brings that to the fore whenever you have a lap one crash and suddenly you see that none of the other Yamahas are really anywhere. We're going to take a quick break on the Paddock Pass podcast. When we come back, we're going to have a quick look ahead to the Japanese Grand Prix. Welcome back to the Paddock Pass podcast presented by Fly Racing and Renthal Street. Adam, the Motul Grand Prix of Japan. This is a much easier one to pronounce for me rather than the other ones.
Well done, Steve. You took the risk there.
Oh, I went all out for that, what are you thinking for this weekend? Obviously, Motegi is always a bit of a strange track, very high on fuel consumption. We've seen riders run out of fuel. We've seen lots of issues in the past. This is always an interesting round, a very unique track, obviously built into an oval. There's a lot around Motegi that's a little bit different than everything else.
Yeah, I mean, also, Steve, another important factor to remember, like Dave was asking quite a few of the riders in debriefs over the weekend in Aragon, is that it's the first time we've been there since 2019, and there's quite a large segment of the grid that haven't ridden a MotoGP bike, Brad Binder being one of them, for example, at Motegi. So it is kind of a clean slate for a lot of riders. We actually asked Brad about this on Sunday after the race because when you go to a new track, he explained that he's not in the same situation like he was in his rookie season in 2020 because he obviously knows much more about setting up the RC16. He knows how the bike much more intimately. He knows the track. He's raced there. So it's a case of just putting that all together as quick as he can. Whereas when you are a MotoGP rookie, you spend a large chunk of FP1 and FP2 just trying to work out your braking markers, your setup, whatever else. So it's going to be a period of acclimatization, which is not going to be assisted further by the adjusted time schedule. Of course, it's something that hasn't really been explained. I guess as journalists, we really should have got to the bottom of the matter as to why MotoGP is scampering from Spain all the way to Japan in the space of 1 week, further complicated by the after effects of the typhoon that had quite a few people talking on Sunday in Motorland about a possible postponement of the Grand Prix or a cancellation even because, Japan was on national alert. I think there were millions of people evacuated from their homes. So it was somewhat unrealistic to expect a motorsport event to go ahead. But thankfully, it seems to have passed over and MotoGP will take place in Japan in usually temperate, chilly and rainy conditions, I gather. But it's cool to go back to a circuit that we haven't been to in a while. Marc Marquez was the last winner there. He's obviously not going to be fighting really for victory this time. Dovi, I think, was on the podium, and Quartararo, which bodes well. I said Quartararo will probably win in Field Pilot and Sepang, but he's obviously going to be competitive here at a track that's very notorious for being hard braking, hard accelerating, not exactly playing to the strengths of the M1, but the Frenchman is particularly apt at this venue.
I mean, why are we flying from Aragon to Motegi? Mostly because it's actually really difficult to put a calendar together. You've got so many things to take account of. You've got to plan when the free weekends are at particular races. You've got to try and not clash with F1 whenever possible, which basically means if you're racing on the same weekend, you really want to be on a different continent or at least a different time zone. And they have a lot of races to sort of jam into the end of the season. So I think this one is in particular is a bit of a poor decision because we won't have any action on Friday morning. It looks like all of the freight, I mean, speaking Tuesday lunchtime, it looks like all of the freight is going to get there on time, so we won't lose Friday altogether. But yeah, it's just a bit strange. And this is, I think, one of the most important things to remember here is that this is a track which is, firstly, very, very, very heavy on fuel. That immediately takes away the advantage of the Ducati. I mean, the Ducatis will be fast. They'll end up on pole because then they can just like squirt, dump all 22 litres into a single lap almost. But over race distance, they've got to really lean everything out. It means they're cutting a lot of power, and that brings everything back in. It's really heavy on braking. Motegi is one of the tracks where they used to I think the use of the 355s now, 355 millimeter brake discs is now compulsory because that braking really loads the front. Braking is going to be very important. Being able to brake and carry corner speed into a couple of those corners. It's very open, and Pecco. It wasn't a great track for Pecco when he was here. I think it's a better track for Fabio. But I think the way that the Ducati has changed between 2019 and 2022 doesn't help the Ducati either. So I think it's going to be a much more open race than it has been previously.
I think also it looks like it's going to be pretty wet on Friday when we do have that one session on Friday afternoon. It'll probably be in the rain. Saturday looks as though it's going to be pretty wet as well. So we could well have a situation where several of the guys on the grid are going into the MotoGP race on Sunday with basically next to no dry track time on a MotoGP bike at Motegi, and that in those kind of situations, you think that that Yamaha and Fabio are usually very fast straight out the box, and then the others kind of spend the weekend catching up to them. You think back to Portimao, where I think both Friday, Saturday, maybe even Sunday morning were rain affected. And there was no setup time, and Fabio just put his settings in from last year, and they worked a treat. He ran out dominant winner. Obviously, we haven't been to Motegi since 2019, but as Ad was saying, the Yamaha was working pretty well here back then. So I think it's kind of wide open in a way. You can never really predict too many things, but I think the circumstances and the conditions that we might have over the weekend, if Fabio can qualify well in the wet, say we have a wet session, then I think that could set him up nicely for Sunday. Yeah,
you can never predict too much, but I will make one bold prediction. Dave, if you think throwing in 20 kilos of extra fuel is going to still give you a full time, you're never going to be a MotoGP crew chief. So you're going to just have to stick to being the journal. But I think Motegi's looking like it should be quite an interesting weekend. I'm looking forward to it. Adam, obviously, you've already mentioned it. You're straight out to America to get to Motocross the Nation, so we won't have you on for the Patreon show throughout the course of the weekend. I'm obviously in Catalonia this weekend for World Superbike, so it'll be David and Neil bringing you the Paddock Note show throughout the course of the weekend. But make sure to go to patreon.com/PaddockCast podcast to sign up for that. For $10 a month, you're able to get all the latest news over each day of a Grand Prix weekend, and that's where the team get together and we go to the debriefs and then immediately record a show 15-20 minutes long, just to be able to get everyone up to speed all the way through the weekend. So check out patreon.com/PaddockCast podcast. Be sure to drop us a message at PaddockCastPod on Twitter. And if you have any questions over the weekend, we'll obviously endeavour to get them answered during the course of our Paddock Notes show. But from all of us here, it's been a lot of fun looking back to Aragon. We're looking forward to the flyaways. Big thanks to Renthal Street and to Fly Racing for supporting the podcast. And big thank you to everyone for listening to this show as well.